I remember my mom telling me a story of a nightmare she used to have when she was younger. She said that one night before she drifted to sleep, she saw this shadowed figure in the corner of her room, watching her. She kept her eyes on the figure, but she knew eventually she would have to blink. Finally, her eyes grew tired and she blinked. Once she blinked, she saw the figure had moved further into the room, moving slowly, step by step, closer to her bed. My mother could almost make out the details of the figure. She knew if she blinked one more time, she could get a better look. But by doing so, the figure would be that much closer to the bed, and that much closer to my mom. So she did it again. Blink. The figure was only a few steps from the bed now, and it was being partially illuminated by the nightlight my mother had on her nightstand. The figure was grotesque. She could tell it once resembled a clown, but the makeup had run off its face, leaving it sunken with prune-like skin. The once shining red nose had now turned to a pale red and was cracking into pieces. The clown's hair was now drenched and disheveled. The once vibrant color of the hair now was a dark brownish gray. His clothes looked worn. The color had faded, and there were rips and tears all along the leggings of the pants and the sleeves of the shirt. My mother stared in silent horror as she looked at the clown. Normally, my mother wasn't the least bit afraid of clowns, but this wasn't a normal clown. The more she stared at him, the more afraid she was. She felt her eyes grow dry, and it finally happened. Again, she blinked. My mother couldn't breathe, and the moment she blinked had given the clown enough time to stand right next to her. He was now standing over her bed, staring at her with a smile spread across his face. My mother tried to scream, but no sound came out. My mom felt the need coming back, the need to blink. My mom fought for all she could, the tears streaming down her cheeks until blink. My mother stared at him. She looked up at the clown, and it hadn't moved. My mother stared at him, waiting for something. But when she looked at the clown's face, she noticed that his mouth was slowly creeping open, and water poured like a faucet from his mouth. She listened. The clown was making a gurgling sound. The water that poured from the clown's mouth started to tint before turning a deep red and grew thick. It started to pour blood. His eyes looked crazy as he opened his eyes much further than any other human could possibly open them, and his mouth elongated much larger than the human jaw could withstand. His teeth stained with blood and his tongue licked them, savoring the taste of it. My mother closed her eyes, shut begging for this horror to end. When she opened her eyes, he was gone. She stood up and turned on her light. She looked at the corner of the room where the clown once stood and looked down at the floor and saw something that made her heart stop. Wet footprints leading from the corner to the side of her bed where the clown stood. Was it all a nightmare? Did she make believe the drowned clown? Or did it all really happen? My mother doesn't really know for sure, but what I know is that last night I saw something stand in the corner of my room, watching me sleep. And I can only pray it wasn't him.